Andy, appreciate your time, my guy. First and foremost, it's been incredible to watch your progress over the past couple years and getting to know you. But I want to take a step back and talk about your background and kick it off. You've worked in various capacities across the sports industry, but what ultimately made you want to transition into helping athletes invest, which is what you're doing in your current role with the Players Fund.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for the invitation, and it's been a pleasure as well seeing your growth with Vetted Sports. So right back at you on that. In terms of the transition, I think everything joins up looking backwards, but it's not always that obvious going forwards. I mean, I started off at a sports agency, then through starting a newsletter, built some relationships that led me to work more on the sports tech side. Um, for a sports media tech business and then sort of on the sports performance tech side of things. And it was a relationship also, again, through that same newsletter that kind of led me into exploring VC. And I guess where my unique skill set sat was kind of one was building communities and kind of like being able to connect people and like identify where there was like valuable introductions to be made, which was obviously quite helpful for our portfolio companies, kind of like understanding who they should be speaking to. My first role when I first joined was as value creation partner, so it's kind of like figuring out what the companies that we've invested in need and how can we help facilitate their growth. And having worked for two startups, I had a bit maybe more of an intuition in terms of like what it's actually like working at a startup. In terms of the motivation with athletes, that's obviously a very attractive part of the Players Fund. I have less to do with the day-to-day interactions on the athlete side, but the athletes play a key role in kind of like our strategic positioning as a fund, um, which is basically, if you've ever read the book A-List Angels, it probably explains it best, but it's basically how do you leverage the influence and access that athletes have to get into the best possible deals at the venture stage. So the Players Fund essentially acts as a bridge between the venture ecosystem and athletes, and it's basically an idea to collectively pool the athletes' capital in one place and then help get them into the best possible deals and co-invest alongside the tier one funds rather than maybe some other athlete-backed funds that are more focused on sports tech or leading rounds and things like that. And looking over to the States a lot for inspiration because I think athlete investment is a lot more established there than in the UK and Europe. So yeah, looking over to your side of the pond for inspiration all the time.
Absolutely. And when you look at the inception of the Players Fund, why do you think that now was the right time to launch a syndicate model to help athletes invest?
Yeah, so but it's not actually a syndicate model. It's the athletes have actually invested and are LPs in the fund, and we invest on their behalf into the best companies. We do some SPVs into kind of sports assets that sit outside of that fund. Um, but I guess from a timing perspective, the I guess trend or momentum was already there from the States. Athletes in UK and Europe were more interested, and I think COVID is a point that Fergus, one of the co-founders, speaks about a lot in terms of athletes suddenly not playing, being furloughed, like suddenly that income from your playing career isn't as given as maybe it previously was. Um, and so athletes started to look in two directions to kind of like diversify. One was media and like how can you leverage media? And I think we've seen a lot of athletes launch kind of media businesses. And the other was to kind of like get smarter when it comes to investing and diversifying kind of revenues. But yeah, that's essentially where we were coming from. It was like relationships directly with athletes. They were telling us this is what they needed, and it just didn't exist. So that was kind of the core driver, I guess.
Got you. And then as far as like the opportunities that you guys are currently looking at or most interested in, like what does that kind of look like across the ecosystem? Is there like specific industries that you guys, because obviously I think when you look at the value that athletes can bring, a lot of it is consumer brands and things of that nature. So are there any overarching sectors or verticals or industries that you guys are most bullish on or looking for opportunities in more than others?
Yeah, so I think we like to say no billboards and a social media post. That's kind of like our position. I think athletes can go and add a lot of value to consumer-facing brands, but that's probably something they can go do on their own. So, like as a collective, we're not looking to leverage the IP. Um, so if we go invest in a company, they don't suddenly have the rights to go use all of our athletes on their next advertising campaign. It's more about the kind of like discrete access and the opportunities that can be unlocked, the connections that these athletes have into different rooms that the founders want to get into, the connections that these athletes have to corporate partners. There's all kinds of value that I think athletes maybe don't appreciate that they have while they're playing. And we're there to kind of try and educate them on that value that they do have and make them more aware of it. And then also to kind of leverage that. In terms of companies, we're generally seed Series A. We're sector agnostic. Um, so we'll invest in, we've invested in cybersecurity businesses, we've invested in ticketing, we've invested in, health tech. So sometimes there's a synergy with something an athlete might use where it's like health related, but sometimes it's, a cybersecurity business or a manufacturing, logistics AI company, right? Like it doesn't have to be. We're just trying to get into the best possible deals at that kind of seed Series A stage and invest alongside the kind of like what you'd consider maybe like the tier one venture funds by writing fairly small checks and being really additive to the rounds that they're going in and leading. So yeah, we're very much positioning ourselves as kind of like the cherry on top to come in and to give athletes that initial exposure to like the best kind of early stage businesses, mostly in Europe, but some also in the States as well.
You alluded to this earlier about like athletes wanting to build their brands, build their own, business empires, et cetera. And we are seeing like a huge uptick in a trend, and even that's trickling down to younger ages and younger athletes. What are some misconceptions that you think athletes might have about venture capital specifically, and maybe some words of caution when they're getting into this space? Because it is, it could be very high risk, and there are, some it's not all, major returns and successful outcomes. So what are some of
Yeah.
the, I guess, pieces of advice or educational things that you all do, or things that you like to tell athletes about this space?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it's like, and part of the reason for the collective is kind of like, instead of trying to do this all yourself, by being part of a collective, there's more due diligence that can be put into looking at the companies. If any of our athletes have an opportunity that they're looking at, they can bring it to us. We can look at it. We can have our kind of investment committee provide feedback for them so that they're kind of able to understand that. I mean, if you're early in your career, you maybe don't fully understand what a term sheet should look like, what good metrics you should be looking out for. So part of it's just educational and kind of like don't necessarily go write massive checks straight away. Um, and then part of it's also to the point around media, right? Like there are some early stage businesses that maybe you want to align with really closely and you want to put your face to them, but you're going to dilute your brand as an athlete if you're putting your face to absolutely every business you invest in. And so kind of the opportunity with the Players Fund was like you're going to get exposure to, 20, 30, 40 companies here, which your capital is going to be spread across and you're not having to put your face to every single one of them, right? Like I think that there's certain things that maybe you want to go and push the boat out for because it's a sector that you've identified a specific kind of like alignment from a personality perspective. So an example being like Andy Murray and Castor, right? Like he went all in on that business because it made sense and it was like he had his blue chip partners like his Amex and his uh I don't know, Land Rover or whatever it is. They're like his like kind of core partners. But then he was like, cool, I haven't got an Adidas deal anymore. I've got a couple years left of being kind of like top of the game. I could go take a smaller contract with Nike or Adidas or one of the kind of like big guys, but they're not willing to give me what I want. Therefore, I'm gonna go kind of all in on this challenger apparel brand, right? And you kind of saw the same with Roger Federer and On, where he had a 20-year deal with Nike that ended, and then
Yeah.
big on that and was like willing to put his face to it. So I think it's kind of like finding the right mix, right? Because if you put your face to too much new stuff, then the impact you can have for those companies dilutes. But also you dilute your own brand. So I think it's just kind of like understanding when to be front facing and when to invest, but add the value kind of back of house through just things that you might not even think are valuable, like introductions to your corporate partners or to maybe like political figures or to friends you have that work in industry. Like there's doors that you can open that you might not realize are a superpower until you stop playing.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think that's where maybe athletes could can better leverage themselves while they're playing without having to put their face to everything.
For
Um,
sure. Yeah, for sure, for sure. And when you look at the entire athlete investment ecosystem, like obviously there are syndicate models, there are other firms that have or want athletes as
yeah,
LPs. What do you really think separates you guys in this
yeah,
kind of trending ecosystem of athlete
yeah.
investing?
Yeah. Well, first off, like our athletes can also be part of other groups. It's not like an exclusivity thing. So we're quite happy if our athletes want to engage in other opportunities as well. I think on the syndicate side of things, like we do some syndicate deals into kind of sports assets. So we invested into TGL. Um, we've invested into Hexagon Carp as well with like a couple of our athletes. So I think sometimes with those kind of sexier deals, it's easier to get athletes to come in on a syndicate basis. I think the challenge when you're investing in kind of generalist venture opportunities is like an early stage AI cybersecurity company that might be the one that returns the fund isn't necessarily the thing that gets an athlete super excited. And so, like, are they going to come in on that deal as a SPV, or are they going to come in on the kind of like exciting opportunity within, I don't know, media or kind of like entertainment type
Mhm.
stuff, right? Like it's hard to get excited about like I don't know software for internal workflow communications, right? But like that
Yeah.
might be the business that like does really well. So it's like I think it's more just about like if you're doing it as a syndicate, um, you probably it's going to take a lot of education if every time you want to do a deal, you're having to educate a very broad base of people about why this is a really exciting opportunity that could return the fund. Um, so for us, having them in as a collective means they're getting that broader kind of distribution and visibility across a portfolio of companies. Um, and of course, there's other funds which they could get involved in. I think there's some other athlete funds that do things like in the sports tech space. We don't really touch quite so much on sports tech as some of the other kind of athlete back funds. And they could also just join, traditional VCs. I think where we've differentiated ourselves is we have no minimum investment amount and no fees for athletes because we want to be that kind of initial bridge for them. So if they come to us, we make no money off them if they put 500K in or 10K in.
Mhm.
So we're not incentivized in the same way to try and squeeze as much as we can out of that athlete from day one. Um, and I think athletes as well generally want to invest collectively, like they're used to being in a team. And so being alongside their teammates, I think, also helps versus if you're part of a general fund where you're the only athlete, you're going to be the one that gets named every time that fund does anything in the press because it'll be Malcolm Lemon's backed VC fund, invest in so and so. So you become kind of the face of it. Kind of de as a default. Whereas if you're part of a collective with 150 athletes, you've got a bit more safety in numbers, I guess, of like it's not just you being called out on your own and kind of being singled out as the only athlete investor there. Um, so yeah, I'd say that's probably like the core proposition, but that's not to say that we think we're better than everyone. We're only just starting out, so um, time will tell based on our results. We'll let the companies we invest in do the talking in terms of how well we're performing.
Absolutely. I want to shift and talk about the Como 1907 partnership. How did that come about and kind of dive into the details of that partnership?
Yeah, sure. So this is probably where I'm more comfortable speaking because this is the bit that I'm leading on kind of day to day. Um, so like I mentioned it kind of at the start in terms of coming from an agency background and working with kind of tech partners that were selling into sports teams. So my background is really kind of like that relationship between early stage businesses and sort of companies or teams, leagues. I think there's such a big opportunity for sports and entertainment IP to almost operate as a accelerator of early stage businesses. And so the thesis was basically the same way that athletes can kind of supercharge these companies. We also believe that if we partner with the right organizations, they can also be an accelerant of early stage businesses. And that goes beyond just sports tech. So, with Como in particular, they've built out a really robust hospitality and tourism business. They obviously attract a lot of like high net worth individuals and celebrities from the US that come over for games. George Clooney has a house on the lake, that kind of thing. So it kind of lends itself to that audience. So I think, we're not just looking to invest into football tech on their behalf. We're looking to find businesses that are venture worthy on their own and use the club and the environment that the club is situated in to help accelerate those businesses and propel them forwards. And so, yeah, I think there's a really exciting opportunity to do this elsewhere. I would say half my time is spent kind of executing on Como Ventures and getting the right cohort companies in for this first batch. And the other half is spent on new business. So kind of identifying what sports and entertainment IP could we partner with that would be complementary. Um, and by complementary, I mean I don't want to partner with a club that has the exact same investment thesis as Como. I want to find other opportunities and other rights holders that could offer different value, right? So maybe that's an NBA team, which then provides portfolio companies and early stage businesses in Europe a path to North America. Or maybe it's a Formula One team that is able to give really in-depth introductions to a lot of kind of like engineering and kind of B2B SaaS businesses because they typically sponsor F1 teams. So it's kind of like thinking a little bit outside the box of like what would be the perfect suite of sports and entertainment IP partners for the Players Fund so that if we are speaking to a company and trying to get an allocation in a deal for us, but also for our for these organizations that we partner with, what's the perfect suite of partners where we're going to have something for whoever it is that we're trying to invest in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And so you see Como as kind of being a testing ground, but you see this as a scalable model with other teams as well.
Yeah, yeah. So the plan would be to add a couple of teams. We're not looking to grow
Yeah.
massively in terms of quantity. I think, there's only so many great early stage businesses on a year to year basis. So, we don't want to have like 50 partners, because then it's just going to be impossible to service them all as with as much quality as we would want to. But we're looking to bring on board the right partners so that we can kind of um, offer the right services to the right founders, if that makes sense. So, there might be, if we're speaking to a business, it's like, what would be the perfect partner for them in order to help accelerate their business? Now, Como is the answer for some of them, but for others, like I don't know, a business that's looking to accelerate into the North American market, maybe it's an NBA team or an MLB team um, or maybe it's a motorsport team because they have some traction within the automotive industry and they want connections through to automotive partners. Like it's kind of like trying to strategically plot out what those other partners could look like.
Hmm. And is there any crossover with like what you guys are doing with the Players Fund and the play like the actual athletes from Como as well? Is that a part of the partnership?
To begin with, no, but I
Okay.
think it's an opportunity for it to become something over time. So quite a lot of our players are current players. I think it makes that slightly tricky, but
Yeah.
we're definitely open to it. Like we spoke when we had conversations with Como. They have a player that's recently retired that's quite active in investing. So there was discussions about could we bring him into the investment committee. It hasn't happened straight away, but that's not to say that it won't happen down the line. I think if there was a player that was really actively interested, it could be something where we create kind of a integration where like a certain player is part of the mix. But yeah, it's kind of a case by case basis, I think.
Got you. Got you. That makes sense. Last couple questions before we wrap up here. When you look at, I guess, the next like 5 to 10 years, specifically in Europe, when it comes to athletes and venture, like how do you see the ecosystem evolving, over those next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a tricky question to answer. I think you'll just see more and more interest from athletes. I think, you know, Europe is probably 5 to 10 years behind the US. So what the US looks like now is probably a good place to look if you want to understand what the European landscape is going to look like. Um, I think the fact that you've got things like the NBA actively looking to expand into Europe as well will probably enhance that kind of hunger for more things like the Players Fund and Como Ventures, because there's just I'd say a more strong kind of entrepreneurial drive in the US than you get in Europe. I think like regulatory wise and risk taking wise, like Europe and UK generally are more risk averse than like the American counterparts.
Yeah.
But I think there's probably a bit more kind of education that needs to happen on the UK and Europe side, and hopefully we'll be part of that kind of driving force of kind of educating athletes and making them more aware um, of kind of like the opportunity within venture. Not necessarily saying all of them should be investing into VC, but like they should be aware of the opportunity within VC and like understand that it's an option alongside other investment classes and opportunities that they may have. In terms of exactly where it goes, I mean, I can speak to where the Players Fund hope to be in kind of
Yeah,
for
sure.
a time in
Please.
terms of having like more athletes, having raised kind of bigger and broader funds, having more corporate venture partners, both leagues and teams that we can leverage as kind of accelerators. And like, I think that's a kind of symbiotic relationship. I think teams and leagues typically won't have the experience in-house to go and become VCs, and it'd probably be quite expensive for them to try and do that in-house. So I think that there's kind of a mutual opportunity for teams and leagues that are already accelerators of innovation across so many different areas for them to participate in the upside of like what they're helping to create. Um, and kind of like I think there's some sort of commercial realities that are now hitting teams in various leagues in terms of media rights declining that mean clubs and leagues are now more open to finding or looking for alternative commercial opportunities. Which I think is why, the traction was in Italy because like the rights market isn't quite the same. And so if you're going to compete on a European scale, as a sort of Italian football club, if you want to be making the Champions League and competing at the top of European football, which Como do, you need to be slightly more creative in terms of like how you're going to go about getting that revenue. And I think, I've seen the interest that we've had inbound is generally from clubs in markets where there's a greater need to diversify commercial revenues. So I would guess that those markets will end up being the ones that have a head start on this. And yeah, I think you're just going to see more creativity in general in terms of like not everything is going to be sponsors and media rights. There's going to be new lines of opportunity and commercial revenue to be had, and the clubs that can position themselves right will be the ones that benefit most from that.
Absolutely. Well, Andy, look, I love what you guys are building. It's truly needed and appreciate your time once again. Can you let people know where they can learn more about the Players Fund and also connect with you?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the Players Fund website is playersfund.vc. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn at Andy Marston. or search Andy Marston Players Fund, and it should hopefully be the top result. They're probably the first two places to look. And yeah, happy to connect with anyone that's curious to find out more.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate it, man.
Cool. Cheers.